The Parkland Institute is hosting the Implementing a Just Transition Conference on February 23rd and 24th online. And Catherine Abreu, former executive director of the Climate Action Network, is one of the panelists. Welcome to the interview, Catherine.
Great to be here, Markham. Thanks for having me.
Now, why are you interested in a just transition? I understand that it has something to do with your Nova Scotia roots.
That's right. So you and I first met, Markham, when I was working at Climate Action Network Canada as the executive director there, which I did for about 5 years. But before that, I was working at the Ecology Action Centre, which is one of Canada's longest running and largest, Atlantic Canada's largest and longest running environmental organization. And I ran their climate and energy programs. And I worked at the EAC because my Canadian family is all from Nova Scotia, but I grew up in Toronto because in the 80s, my family moved from Nova Scotia to the Ontario manufacturing sector for work. And the reason they had to make that move is in part because of the collapse of the cod fishery and the huge knock-on economic effects that collapse had across the Atlantic region. And so really my family history and the reason that I had to grow up so far away from where my Canadian family's roots are is because governments saw the writing on the wall. They knew the cod fishery collapse was coming and they totally failed to plan for it. And it created this internal labor migration where Atlantic Canada kind of emptied out and at first moved to Ontario and now are moving further west for work to Alberta a lot of the time. And I just really don't want to see that happen again. And when I take a look at where Canada's economy is right now, it seems plain to me that we are in the midst of an energy transition that's taking place globally. And we therefore have to take the time that we have right now to plan a transition away from fossil fuel-based energy that can really take care of people and communities so that other people don't have to wind up in the situation that I wound up in, growing up far away from where my family's roots were, and then having to return to my homeland to some extent to get to know it as an adult. So that's really where a lot of my passion for working on this issue comes from and why I made it a real focus of my work at Climate Action Network Canada, working hand in hand with the labor union members of that network, and why I've now founded Destination Zero, which is in part completely designed to think through the energy transition and how we put people at the center of it.
Well, Catherine, where is Canada right now with its just transition?
That's a great question. So another part of the work that I did at Climate Action Network Canada was linking arms with members to demand a task force on just transition for Canadian coal workers in the coal power sector. So you'll know, and your viewers will know, that a few years ago, as part of Canada's climate plan, we accelerated the phase out of coal power across the country. And workers were speaking up and unions were speaking up and saying, hey, we understand that we need to do this to meet our climate commitments, that coal is some of the dirtiest fossil fuels out there and using it to produce electricity doesn't make sense. And we have alternative energy sources we can use. But what about us? What's the plan for us? And the government hadn't been very proactive in putting that plan together. And so in 2017, we saw the launch of Canada's Just Transition Task Force. It was chaired by Conservation Council of New Brunswick and the Canadian Labour Congress. And they came up with some really amazing recommendations for just transition for the coal power sector and workers and communities linked to it, but also they came up with amazing recommendations that I think apply to how we think through just transition writ large, not just focused on that coal sector. So that's one thing that we've kind of got in the bag. What's happened since 2018 when the Just Transition Task Force tabled their recommendations? Well, we have seen some of those recommendations being taken up by the federal government. So a fair amount of financial investment being made into some of those communities to help with transition. We haven't seen more of those kind of structural elements been taken up. So the task force made specific recommendations on how government can kind of work to think through the skill set that exists in the current labor market, how that skill set can be transitioned into other less carbon intensive economic sectors. And we really haven't seen more of that structural institutional level of recommendations being taken up by the federal government. We did get a promise in the most recent election from the current governing party to deliver a Just Transition Act. And so that's kind of what we're waiting on now. What is that act going to look like? Will it involve not only a piece of legislation that says just transition is important and we got to do it, but will it involve concrete planning at the regional and community level that gets into these deep questions of what people need to build a climate safe community and a climate safe economy and how we make that happen? So we're kind of waiting on that at this point.
Well, Catherine, thank you very much for this. We'll look forward to your presentation at the conference.
Thanks so much.